Probably today few people can clearly answer the question, what is the soul? The problem of the soul is a multifaceted question. There is still no common understanding here, although the concept of soul lies at the very foundation of our picture of the world. How does the soul work? Can a soul die? In general, the question of the soul has been investigated quite comprehensively. In a general sense, the interpretation of this term according to Wikipedia is as follows. According to religious and some philosophical teachings, the soul is an immortal substance, an immaterial essence in which the divine nature and essence of man are expressed. His personality giving rise and conditioning his life, the ability of sensation, thinking, consciousness, feelings and will, usually opposed to the body. It would seem that there is nothing to add to this, but as practice shows, this definition does not suit many. First of all, in order to agree with this, you need to admit that there is still a God. A significant part of modern humanity does not recognize this in principle. He believes that there is no God. Among those who seem to believe in God, there is no mutual understanding about the details, including the question of the soul. People are more interested in psychology than religion, and believe that the soul is a set of mental phenomena, experiences, the basis of a person's mental life. This is the inner, mental world of a person, and psychically, the world is no longer a substance or an essence, but a property of matter, that is, the brain. From this it turns out that the soul is the properties of the brain. It sounds ridiculous, but some people like it. In order to deal with the soul, we need to understand what philosophy underlies our worldview. The choice is small. The prevailing geocentric materialism today is so firmly rooted in the minds of planetary humanity that many even seemingly religious people do not see any problems and contradictions between religion and modern science. In general, almost everyone recognizes the presence of a soul. Some as some kind of intangible education, others as a property of the brain. Perhaps many will agree that it is the soul, whatever it is, that is the basis of personality or otherwise individuality. This is where the ideological conflict begins, which is connected with the question of death. If we admit that with the death of the body, the personality disappears, then everything else is not so important. If we assume that the personality somehow continues to exist even after the death of the body, then the concept of the soul here is most useful and gives us the opportunity to talk about what is beyond earthly life. Therefore, the question of the soul can essentially be turned to the question of death, or rather, what awaits a person in the next world. Of course, we are not talking about any brain here. Since we allow life after death, then we need to connect the very concept of life with some kind of body that does not die, but on the contrary is a carrier of individual personality qualities. Hence arises the concept of the immaterial substantiality of the soul. Here we are forced to put modern science aside and enter the shaky ground of faith. The question of the immortality of the soul essentially boils down to a discussion about its origin. After all, what is immortality? This is the preservation of individuality indefinitely. To do this, one single condition must be met. At the heart of the soul, there must initially be some kind of basically indestructible principle. Only God himself is eternal and indestructible. Therefore, an immortal soul must, by definition, be based on a particle of God. In the Christian tradition, this principle is called the Logos, or the Word. In Hinduism, the concept of Atman corresponds to it. Hence, in our picture of the world, the idea of dividing the one into God the Creator and God the Son, or Brahman and Atman, appears. These concepts are actually identical with each other, that is, they call the same single principle, but only in different aspects, as universal and as individual. It should be noted here that some theologians do not consider the immortality of the soul to be an absolute given. For example, in the treatise on the immortality of the soul by Master Pietro Pomponazzi Mantuan, the author comes to the conclusion that the soul is mortal by nature and only in some respects immortal. What is meant here is that the basis of the soul is not the Logos itself or Atman, but its nature consists in the fact that it is a collection of bodies or shells that are strung on this immortal rod. Like our physical body, which actually consists of the dense matter of the planet, the shells of the soul are made up of more subtle energies. Each of them corresponds to a certain level of the hierarchy of the universe and serves precisely to connect the beginningless and immortal principle of personality with each of these levels. In particular, the astral body connects the personality with the stellar level of the hierarchy, and the etheric body with the galactic one. From this it becomes clear that what we commonly call the soul is essentially an individualized structure organized hierarchically. It is for this reason that Hermes Trismegistus states in his Emerald Tablet, "What is at the bottom is similar to what is at the top," and so on. All these shells are mortal, in the sense that as we ascend to God, that is, in fact, the restoration of the original unity between the Creator and creation, the higher self throws off these shells as unnecessary. But as long as it is manifested at one of the levels of the hierarchy of the universe, it needs to have a shell corresponding to this level, just as we need a dense body to exist at the planetary level of being. While a person is in a dense body, she gets used to it and, as they say, identifies with it. This means that the dense body has its own, separate consciousness, which is sometimes called the mind, which, however, is very conditional. In addition, a dense body has feelings, and the data of these feelings immerse the soul, that is, a collection of less dense bodies, in a kind of sensorium, a sensory world, the sphere of which is planetary existence. The flow of sensations that the physical world gives to the soul is so intense that the more subtle movements of astral and etheric properties become almost invisible against this background. Organic existence captures the entire sphere of perception of the soul and, as it were, displaces everything else, forcing the mind to forget about the very existence of the soul and its immortal foundation. Materialism in the human environment develops precisely for this reason. The flow of energy received by the soul from the sphere of organic existence is too intense. If during the life of the body the soul does not build the right relationship with all hierarchically organized levels of its own being, then at the moment of its death, a shock occurs. The sensorium ceases to nourish the soul, and it is unable to receive the energy it needs directly from the astral or galactic levels of the universe. This can lead to the subsequent death of the soul, when it splits into components, sheds them, just as it has just parted with its dense body and disembodies. The higher self, which is the true basis of the personality, is of course indestructible, and it reunites with its source, that is, with the Creator. But the personality that was formed around him painfully dissolves into nothingness. There can be no torment for the higher self, because it is by its nature imperishable, indestructible. The torments are experienced by the shells, and this is due precisely to the fact that they are unable to keep the personality from self-disintegration. There is only one way out. Even during the lifetime of denser bodies, one should accustom one's soul to functioning in subtle environments. Meditation in particular serves for this purpose. In addition, the struggle with such sins as gluttony or drunkenness also makes the soul less dependent on the organic sensorium. Some believe that the soul can reincarnate an infinite number of times in new dense bodies, depending on how it behaved during life. In our opinion, this is an absolute simplification, and in fact, the issue of returning to organics is not as trivial as we would like. First of all, you need to understand that this process depends on higher forces. The hierarchy of the universe assumes that each of the levels of this hierarchy is inhabited by countless disembodied souls and obeys objective laws. Of course, if a person has invaluable experience that could be useful to humanity, they can be admitted to a new cycle of carnal life. But this is by no means the rule and is not guaranteed to anyone. A huge number of individual personalities, having entered the river of organic life once, never find such an opportunity again. In addition, there are an infinite number of planetary worlds in our galaxy alone. A new incarnation, if it is destined to happen, may take place in a completely different situation. To do this, again, you need to prove with your whole life the spiritual expediency of your existence. The promise of the Last Judgment is by no means an obstacle in this. It must be understood that leaving the planetary level of manifestation, the soul at the same time leaves the power of time, finds itself in eternity, in a situation where there is no distance between cause and effect. The loss of the physical body is already the beginning of the trial. Everything that happens next is purely individual and no one can know in advance what fate awaits him in the life of the next century. We understand that all of the above causes doubt or rejection among many. Therefore, we consider it important to remind you once again that this is just a description. Reality is infinitely broader and deeper than any description and is in no way limited by our understanding of it. We have no desire to impose our vision and assert that this is the only way and nothing else is the case. However, this view of things removes a number of significant internal contradictions that have accumulated in this topic over the many years of the predominance of the geocentric model of the world. The absence in our picture of the world of clear accents on the fact that the source of all things is one and all things are organized hierarchically. It continues to confuse many and forces them to abandon common sense in favor of outdated ideological stereotypes and prejudices, the main of which is geocentric materialism. The new time that we have already entered and in which we live today requires a new philosophical base on which a new overall picture of the world is being built. Many people see heliocentric philosophy as such a base.